Now let's have our first conversation for the week, of course, for the day and for the week. As we start with status updates on the headwinds the domestic and global economies have to battle with in the second half of the year. The headwinds facing the global economy at the beginning of the year have picked up pace and reached gale-force speeds moving into the second half of the year. There are three main forces shaping the current macroeconomic situation: flagging growth, surging inflation, and central banks tightening. For Nigeria, same upheavals in the first half of the year, from rising energy costs and inflation to currency volatility, and the lower revenue calls for more decisive and out-of-the-box solutions. However, the elements of electioneering activities placed a major cap on how much of a change can be achieved as the implementation of policies take a second bench for political activities. Joining me to discuss some of the economic responses from the central banks and governments and the need for more countermeasures, I have joining me is Mr. Andrew Nevin. He is a partner and a chief economist at Price Waterhouse Coopers. Dr. Nevin, good afternoon, and thank you for your time.
Hello, it's great to be with you.
Yes, of course, we had something to talk about, which, of course, the headwinds and how it affects the economy. But earlier today, we came up, MBS came up with the figures for inflation for the month of July, and it stands at 19.64%, rising from 18.6% that we had in the month of June. Was this expected, this sort of hike in inflation figures?
Well, I don't think myself or PwC expected inflation to moderate. There's no reason to see it go down. The fact that it continues to go up is really worrying. Inflation is a tax on the people, particularly the poorest, the most vulnerable. And what happens when you have inflation is, of course, people don't want to hold on to their naira. They want to turn it into something else. So in economics speak, the velocity of money increases, which then, of course, causes more inflation. So it's very worrying. 20% inflation, or even higher for food, 22% over the last year for food, which is really terrible in our environment and creates hunger and poverty, is not sustainable. Either the inflation has to come down in short order, or people are effectively going to stop trying to use the naira. I mean, we've done I think a pretty good job in Nigeria of not becoming dollarized. You compare it to our neighbor Ghana, for example. But if inflation continues at this level or even higher, then effectively we're going to be making the economy dollarized. People won't want to accept the naira.
Yes, I know it looks like a global issue when you talk about inflation at this time, but something makes Nigeria different, because many believe that we do a lot of imports, and that is something that we believe that we'll also be having imported inflation into our country. Can anything be done to turn this curve at this time, or do we just have to stay with a hike until whatever happens, maybe worst or best scenario?
Well, I mean, we have been, from PwC's perspective, very negative on the three kind of structural policies that really create resource misallocation. So these are the not having cost-reflective electricity tariffs, the foil subsidy, and of course the FX regime. And all of them are now, I think, coming to a head where the system, as we've had it up till now, is not going to survive. I mean, if you think back to 2015, 2016, when oil prices went down and we were in a difficult place, oil prices came back up, we had reasonable production, it took a little pressure off the system. I don't see anything on the horizon right now to take the pressure off the system. In fact, our oil production today was reported at just barely over 1 million barrels a day. You look at the amount that we're subsidizing, effectively oil is no longer producing any value for Nigeria. I mean, it was reported as part of this that the total revenue from NNPC to the federal government is only going to be 3 trillion naira at the most, which is really very, very small, almost nothing on that. So nothing is going to bail us out. And so I think the systems of these systems that have persisted for reasons of enrichment of certain groups in society are going to come to an end. But the only structural way out over the medium term is we need to export more. I'll come back to that in a moment. And then we also need to be more attracted to investment from outside. I mean, foreign direct investment helps balance our balance of payments, increases the demand for the naira. Unfortunately, we've made the country very unattractive. I had a colleague from PwC contact me this morning asking what story he should tell investors from his country about investing in Nigeria. And I had a lot of trouble giving a positive story at this present time. So, I mean, sometimes they say with addiction, you've got to hit bottom to deal with it. I think we may be reaching the end game of the current structure of the Nigerian economy sometime in the next months or 1 or 2 years at the most. But very difficult times for all of Nigeria.
More worrisome at this time is that synergy that everyone should expect between the monetary and the fiscal side. Many will say the monetary side is doing a lot of support, a lot of interventions and initiatives and all of that. Very recently, late last week, the federal government introduced 5% excise duty tax on telecom services. At a time where we know that purchasing powers continue to dwindle, price of everything seems to be on the high side. We now have to also pay more for this kind of service. Is there a synergy between the fiscal and the monetary side at this time where we need to manage things and stabilize as an economy?
Well, I think we've always said the Monetary Policy Committee is very high quality technical work. Their ability to decide on the interest rate movements and the CRR, for example, I don't think it's really been a negative for the economy. On the fiscal side, we all know the problems that we face. I mean, our position on the taxes, on the excise tax, for example, is what's happened is, of course, the federal government is under enormous fiscal pressure. There's the Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative, for example, at the Ministry of Finance, Budget, and National Planning. But the result of it has been to create a multiplicity of new taxes. And there's too many taxes in the country, too much complexity, too many of the taxes going to their own specialized trust fund, which is not the way it should be structured. And now we've just added this 5% excise tax. And the other problem with it, two other problems with it, one is just the social contract is not kept up. I mean, the government is now asking for more money from people, but people have not seen a commensurate increase in services. So people continue to provide their own security, their own power, their own healthcare, their own education, their own infrastructure, yet the government is asking for more. I mean, we could imagine the government asking for more, people agreeing to that if they saw the increase in services. But they haven't seen as well as any kind of attempt by the federal government of Nigeria to streamline its operations, to reduce its expenditures. There was the Orange report. It's now 9 years old, I believe. It was accepted by His Excellency President Buhari in 2020, I believe. But yeah, we haven't seen any positive action to rationalize the MDAs. So all of this drives up the cost of business and makes people reluctant to want to pay more taxes. So on the fiscal side of the house, yeah, we're reaching a difficult spot. What we said for years is the debt is manageable. We don't have a high level of debt. We still don't have a high level of debt, but what we said for years was we needed growth to manage this. It wasn't a revenue problem. It wasn't a tax problem. It was a growth problem. Well, the problem is we haven't had sufficient growth. So now as we try to take more out of a system that's not growing, people are kicking back, and we're now really getting the pressure on the fiscal system where, for example, I think people know that the total tax collection is less than the debt on the interest. So as I said, when you take the multiplicity of factors, I mean, as I said before, in 2016, we were kind of helped out by oil price floating back up. Production was still strong in the country. This time we've got all these headwinds. We've got the global inflation, as you say. We've got the war in Ukraine driving up things that affect us, particularly fertilizer. We have the collapse in the production of oil. I mean, the difference between 1 million barrels and 2 million barrels a day is immense. But we don't look at it on track to get back to 2 million barrels based on all of that. We have the global inflation that we're imported. The Naira, the FX regime is so difficult. We've managed to continually depreciate the Naira, which of course drives up the cost for all the things that we need from the outside. You say we need too many imports. I don't think we look at it that way. I mean, every country needs imports. They don't produce all the things they need in the world. We don't produce cell phones. We don't produce computers. We don't produce machinery. So we're going to be importing all of those things. We just need to produce more things that the rest of the world wants. But right now, for the next 12 months, 18 months, I hate to be, and of course, compounding that's the security situation, and particularly in the agricultural side, that's really contributed to this 22% food inflation because farmers, because of the security concerns, are are planting less hectares. They're only planting it really in the village, and they're not really willing to go to the fields outside. So we take those multiplicity of things. We are in a very difficult space for the next 12 to 18 months. And of course, we're in the election cycle as well. And I've consistently been an optimist on Nigeria. I've lived here a long time, as you know, although based in Abuja now. I'm never, I don't want to say worried, but I just feel we're going to have to go through a very difficult phase in the next period before we can get to a better place.
Great stuff. Fiscal pressure is, of course, imploding because of declining revenues and soaring debt service, or soaring debts. But we've talked about debt. You've also talked about around that. But I'm thinking that the budget 2022 now will majorly be funded by borrowing. That is also scary, as of today, Nigeria's debt to World Bank is saying about $660 million increase in just 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I've never been one of those that worried much about the debt. I've always consistently said we need more growth, we need more growth. But after 6 or 7 years of saying that and not getting the growth, we've now come to the point where the debt is an issue. And of course, we've had the collapse of the oil revenue. I mean, to put this, the government projected, even I think on 1.6 million barrels production, we projected we get 9 trillion worth of revenue from transfer from NNPC to the federal government of Nigeria. Well, that 9 trillion is now looking like 3 trillion. So when you take that plus the foil subsidy going from about 2 trillion originally projected to 6 trillion, we've now opened up a 7, 8 trillion hole that we didn't have, but we were already projecting financed by deficit spending anyway. And now, of course, it's a massive amount. And this goes back to the problem with where the Naira is going, because everyone knows we need to borrow from it. There's a concept in economics called rational expectation. So people understand that the government has this gap. They essentially have to run the printing press for the Naira to fill this gap. And yet when they run the printing press, people then know the Naira is going to decline further. So then they don't want to hold the Naira, and they drive up price, or if they are getting paid in Naira, they want more Naira, so it further fuels inflation. So what we've built in is this mechanism that's just going to accelerate possibly inflation. And I don't want to use the word hyperinflation, but it's a very difficult spot for a currency to go in when no one wants it. When we had inflation 7 to 9%, that's still a tremendous tax, particularly on the bottom of the pyramid. But 7 to 9% stable inflation, people don't feel, because they don't necessarily have options, they don't necessarily feel like they have to go out and spend their Naira today. Okay, it's declining over the year, 6 months, it's declined 3, 5, 6%. I can live with that. But now, if inflation gets above 20%, I know the value of my Naira in 6 months, even if it stays at 20%, it's going to be 10% less. But what if it goes to 30%, it's 15% less? So it just accelerates this concept that you need to spend your Naira and increase the velocity of production. And of course, as I said, to finance these deficits, we've effectively turned on the printing press. No matter how you actually finance it, whether it's CBN financing the federal government directly, or you're issuing T-bills, or you're actually printing physical cash, or creating cash in the bank system, it's all the same thing. More Naira chasing a fixed amount of goods. So we're in a very delicate spot right now with the Naira and all the other issues we face. As I said, I don't want to use the word hyperinflation, but there are many currencies that no longer function because the government took too much advantage of the ability. Seigniorage is the term when the government creates money out of thin air. And you can always create some seigniorage, but when it gets pushed to the point where Nigeria is, it's a real worry whether it's sustainable.
Let's wrap up on this note. As difficult as it looks, talking about removal of subsidy, we talked about this sometime last week, and we've talked about this too before having you on the show. And the governors have come up again to say this is one of the issues that must be addressed. But many are saying that there needs to be a systematic way of taking out subsidy, and also greater transparency in the management of subsidy at the main time. And that's talking the management, and the understanding has to be so simple that we'll understand which is allocated for what. Do you think that works? And also the systematic removal of subsidy.
Look, I'm in the camp where 6.4 trillion Naira, no one's explained where this is going to. It's certainly not benefiting the bottom of the pyramid. It's benefiting people that drive, big cars, and I think in many cases it's simply a form of corruption, right? I mean, His Royal Highness Mohammed Sanusi II, was very clear in his time in the central bank. Even at that date, you had ships that were purportedly delivering oil to the country that either didn't exist or were in some other place at the time. So it's a system set up not to help the poor. It's a system set up to fuel corruption, essentially, right? And of course, it's metastasized. It's got bigger and bigger and bigger as oil prices have gone up, and the amount of oil being shipped off to other countries around West Africa and paying subsidies on oil that we don't actually import. And I think the NAS is exactly correct. This is the largest expenditure of the country, of the public sector. It's bigger than education. It's bigger than healthcare, and it's become a monster. And they're asking the right question: where does this actually go? How much oil do we actually use? If we really wanted to subsidize the oil we were really using, what would actually be the total cost? So those are very good questions. But as I said, I think we're kind of in the end stage of this. Can you systematically change it? I don't think so. I think what's going to happen is there's going to have to just one day there's going to just be a dramatic subsidy regime is over because we're facing kind of a potential fiscal collapse with the 6.4 trillion. Could it be 7 trillion? Could it be 8 trillion? I mean, as the naira depreciates because of the way it's done, of course, the total value of the subsidy increases. So I've never been so direct about the subsidy before. I've always couched in language, we need to move away from it and over time. But I think we've kind of gone beyond that point, and it really threatens the economic stability of the country at where we're at right now.
It's a good way to leave it. Intelligent conversation as usual. Dr. Andrew Nevin is the partner, chief economist at PricewaterhouseCoopers. Thank you so much, and do enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Tomo. Stay safe.
All right, you too.